This is the first of the 3 consecutive weeks of London games. They're going back to Germany. They went to Brazil. We know there have been a lot of designs on going to other places, right? Whether it's Spain, they've talked about China, they've talked about Australia,
Yep.
all of which has led to a lot of speculation in recent years about, okay, at what point do you put a team over in, let's say, London? Of course, the Jaguars have been connected a lot to that, though they've now invested in a facility and a stadium, and that seems like that's off the table. They'll just go keep playing their couple of games every year. It's also come up, could you put a whole division somewhere in Europe, and how would that work? Because that would limit some of the travel. You'd basically have to have 2 headquarters, right, and go back and forth. I've got a different proposal, and I have run this up the food chain to a variety of people who would be involved in any discussion surrounding an 18th game, which, of course, has been a topic of conversation in recent months here about at what point is that going to happen. It would even out the schedule in terms of each team then having 9 home and away games, or would set up a scenario where every team could play 2 international games every year. So here is my idea, my proposal for how this would work. We're calling this, what do we settle on here? We went through like 5 different names. Tom's International Extravaganza.
Hey!
Here it is. This would be my proposal. Again, this is all for a world in which the NFL would go to 18 games, which is probably an inevitability. It's coming. It's a matter of when. And then rather than having teams play sporadically one game internationally, and that takes away a home game, this would put everybody on a level playing field. And here would be my proposal. You have 8 pods of 4 teams each. The NFL schedule is built around, in part, you play one other division in each conference every year, right? So you would take 2 of the teams that are in those divisions that are across from each other. So 4 teams would go at a time. And you would do these somewhere, whether it's multiple cities in Europe, could be multiple countries in Europe, multiple cities in Brazil, multiple cities in China, whatever. Every team would be a part of one of these 4 pods. You would have 8 pods. You would go over and you would play 2 games at a time. So you would be international for, let's say, 10 days. It wouldn't be the quick go there, come back, be jet lagged, try to recover type of situation. You'd actually have longer. You'd have time for your body to adjust. You would then play the other 2 teams within your pod, the 2 teams that are from the other conference. You would play each of those. They're already on the schedule. They're division versus division games, and you would have those teams play. You would sprinkle those between weeks 5 and 12. Every week at a time, you would have 4 teams, and at times 8 teams, because the overlapping times of that, and you would play 32 international games over the course of the season. This would take the inventory that would already exist, plus the additional inventory you got from the 18th game, move those games over. You would then have time for teams to really actually spend a whole week, which I think on some level, to the extent of actually seeing a city or doing something, more community events, ways to grow the pie. It puts additional international inventory there. It creates these games all sell out instantaneously. You get more. The pushback I've gotten when I've run this idea by people really comes down to, as much as anything, it's finances and it's operational. It's owners already don't like giving up a home game and going over internationally. But again, if we're talking about the overall growth of the game and the international push, this is certainly one way that you could do it. You could have flag football events during the week. That's a huge push going into the Olympics here. The operational element is also financial. The cost of moving an entire NFL operation, whatever that is, 150 people, and moving all of it to a foreign country for 10 days, as opposed to just, we got to get through this game. We're going in for 2-3 days. Some teams have gone for the whole week. But a lot of teams now, the Vikings and Jets included, Thursday or Friday, you go in, you make it a shorter stay, even though the league probably, if you ask them, they'd like you to be there a little bit longer. This would remove that choice. This would actually shift it. Plus, you can essentially establish an NFL, whether it's Europe, that would be the logical place to start, type headquarters, where they would take on a lot of the overheads and the operational things. In other words, you may be able to effectively outsource certain parts of the program, the equipment, the practice fields, the hotels. Rather than every team having to individually make all these arrangements, you would basically establish the NFL in these other places. And for those 2 months a year, the NFL exists in whether it's Europe, China, Australia, Brazil, maybe multiple different places. That, to me, is the logical way to do it. You're not moving a whole team. You're not moving a whole division, because ultimately those teams then would have to fly back to the United States and play games. If you could remove some of the overheads, the growth potential of this, I think, is significant. Brockman, your thoughts? You look very thoughtful.
I'm taking it all in, and I'm kind of buying it. I think whether you like them or not, international games are not going anywhere. They're here to stay. I love that there's a fourth window of football, which is super fun. It's 6:30 here.
Imagine if every week from weeks 5 through 12,
we got a
quadruple header.
That's what I'm talking about. Fourth window. Oh, it's great. I think this is. I love it. I'm curious, how far up the flow chart you've taken this idea.
I would say I've had multiple conversations with people who would be in the room if things like this were decided.
Okay.
And again, there is some pushback. I think that, put it this way, this is the most logical. If you want to grow the game,
right,
at some point you have to create the additional international inventory. And I've spent time with teams, back in 2013 when the Vikings went over and played the Steelers in London, I did a lot of behind the scenes stuff. And the amount of care that goes into the meal prep and the facilities, it's all those operational things that are the biggest pain to the teams, which is part of why teams don't want to go for a longer period of time. They want to have the least amount of practice that you can over there, do the least amount of football work, because it's a bigger headache.
Yeah, but if you had a base NFL headquarters, almost like a 345 Park, but in London, say, and you had how many employees, and that was their sole job, is to take care of this 2-month window where the league is playing games there, that would take a lot off of the plate of individual teams that, something that they don't really want to do anyway. So have the league take care of it. And then, like you said, ultimately it's growing the game. It's eventually maybe expansion over there 10, 15, 20 years down the line. I think this is a great way to kind of plant those seeds and have it grow. Look, you look at the fans love it. The international fans absolutely love the NFL.
Yes.
If you look at all these games,
they sell out in 10 minutes.
They sell out in no time. It's like a Taylor Swift concert, basically. And, all the jerseys in the stands and the apparel, it's a huge hit. And so it makes sense that eventually this is going to be a real thing where it's going to be part of every single week. We're going to have some type of international game.
And there's some of these more experimental type things, like Brazil was clearly an experiment. And there were, the good parts of it. I personally, I saw criticism of the sound and the look of the game on TV and whatnot. I had no issues with the game presentation. The field was not great.
Right.
That was not ideal. Although, if you polled players on, would you rather have a really sloppy field where the grass is chunking up, or would you rather have a turf that's gripping you and you're worried that you're going to pull your Achilles on any given snap? You'd take the field where things slide.
Right.
That was a soccer field. If you watch soccer games, that stuff happens. And those are dudes who weigh 160 pounds instead of 300 pounds.
Yeah.
So those ones are less fully baked. Europe, on the other hand, is pretty far down the line, going all the way back to the NFL Europe days in the late 90s, early 2000s,
the waffle.
where you had, a similar type of thing. It was just with, other than obviously there were the Kurt Warners and Jeff Garcias of the world, but it was, other than that, it was a lot of fringe type players. Now imagine you essentially reestablish the European operations. Just to give an example, you could certainly, as time goes on, figure out, is Brazil viable long-term, is China viable long-term, Australia, and put one pod there. But if you started out even just saying, we're going to put everybody in Europe, think about the proximity factor of Europe and the amount of different places that you potentially could go. If everything can move on land, everything can move by train, car, whatever it is, yep. You could be in Germany, you could be in Ireland, you could be in Great Britain, you could be in Spain. There's a lot of different, optionality to that. I just think that, continuing to add games, which they want to do, and you've seen that slate expand, albeit incrementally, which is how the NFL does pretty much everything, other than institute a pass interference rule that gets whacked after a year. They don't do anything willy-nilly, just, seat of their pants. It's all very much like you do a little bit and you reevaluate. And if it worked, you do a little bit more. This would be a big move, and maybe it's not something that happens instantaneously, but the moment you go to 18 games, the math problem changes. Everybody's had kind of the narrow view of, do you move a team or teams there? What if you move everybody there for whatever that is, 9% of your schedule, 10, 11% of your schedule every year. It's a ways off, but short of ending up with like a, Dubai football situation where somebody else starts a competing league, like the best chance of international expansion is via flag football, which comes in 2028, to push that in places that don't already have it in a huge way, expand the inventory, take the best players in the world to other territories, and see where it goes.
Would you say, let's say your plan goes into place? Roger,
I'd like to think that it will.
Goodell blesses it. I think it's a great idea. 10 years, 15 years until this is a reality? How long? In
terms of the international slate going?
Yeah, in terms of doing your idea until that.
It's going to have to be reevaluated when they go to 18 games, which the CBA ends after 2031. So that's 7 years down the road. There's a new regime with the NFL Players Association. Lloyd Howell's the new executive director. He comes from a business background. And so you would think somebody with a business background probably looks at this and says, wait, so we either can wait 8 years to start making more money by playing 18th game, or we can negotiate a better deal for ourselves ASAP. Doesn't mean it's front burner. Doesn't mean it's happening next year. But it's probably happening sooner than later. Mm-hmm. Once you get that 18th game, there's real conversations to be had of where does that 18th game opponent come from? How do you divide? That would even things out, 9 home games, 9 away games, but you're also expanding the international slate at the same time. The 18th game, to me, is what opens up all these options for potentially expanding the international slate. If you're going to expand the international slate, the idea that half the league every year is going to go play an international game, or every team's going to play an international game, but they're all one-offs, operationally, it just doesn't make a ton of sense. I still think you have to get through the financials. No owner, if you go to 18 games, is going to go like, hey, can we all give away a home game every year? That'd be great. Nobody wants to think through that lens. If you're talking about the broader increase in the value of franchises, and where does that come from? It's the ratings are higher than ever. It's penetrated every aspect of American life. It's not that way really overseas. 2028 is the LA Olympics. Right? That's flag football. That's where we'll make its debut. Yep. So you're going to have natural buy-in to the idea of football here. By 2032, that's 8 years down the road. You got to be thinking about where are the 2032 Olympics? I don't even know off the top of my head. It's not a place with a massive American football base. I can fairly say that without even knowing. It's not in Canada. I don't think it's in Germany.
Brisbane, Australia.
Brisbane, Australia. Wow, Australia, one of those places that they would really love to play a game. You got to be thinking about over the next 8 years, how do you expand the reach of the sport? Big way to do that is put more NFL games out there. And I'd be shocked. I would be shocked if you didn't have one or more games in Australia prior to 2032. Where do those games come from? Maybe it's from the 18th game.
Do you think NFL players are playing in the 28 Olympics?
I think that in order for them to gain the buy-in that they want to, you are going to need names to play in those games. You can't have it be. Listen, I've watched.
All due respect to Hoosh.
Well, that's the thing. Is it's like listen, we have flag football or touch football games, the OT7 League and stuff on NFL Network. It's entertaining. Yeah. It's really entertaining stuff, but it's not Tom Brady throwing to Tyreek Hill entertaining. Is it going to be former players? Is it going to be active players who get let out? You wouldn't think you have a super high degree of injury risk, but there's still injury risk. Robert Brooks tore his Achilles in the Pro Bowl in 95 playing beach football back when they did that.
And shredded his whole leg.
Basically never played again.
Right. That was on the beach.
It was on the beach, but it's still weird things can happen. It's a lower risk, just like you don't have as many injuries in 7-on-7 and OTAs, but there's still a few dudes who get serious injuries.
But you've already heard Patrick Mahomes and Caleb Williams talk about wanting to play in this.
Right. And if Patrick Mahomes says, I want to play,
he's playing.
It's hard to imagine the NFL is going to go, no, we don't want to have the most compelling product. As much as that's, 92 in the Dream Team. What was it? Was it Senegal that they played or whatever and beat them by 90 points? Angola. Yeah. Right. That happened. But look 30 years later and look how competitive the Olympics are. That's what really drove the growth internationally of basketball was those games. Right. It was seeing Michael Jordan and Larry Bird. If it was just Christian Laettner was the primary player on that team and wasn't the 15th guy on the bench, because everybody forgets he was on the Dream Team. Didn't really play a whole lot, but he was on the team.
I don't think anyone forgets that.
No one forgets Christian Laettner was on the team.
Yeah, I think we all kind of know, right?
Well, I think we're of a certain age with that. If you said like the memories, it was Barkley shoving somebody, it was Michael Jordan, and it was Magic coming back, and it was Larry, Drexler, Ewing.
The iconic Sports Illustrated cover with those guys and the rings.
Right.
I just think we're going to see it. These teams can complain all they want, but Patrick Mahomes is playing in the Olympics, like almost guaranteed.
And my point in this is, if you want to drive this for the next 30 years, you don't think through the lens of let's just give them a product. It's let's give them the best product. Let's have these guys absolutely destroy everybody on the playing field, but then also drive all these kids who are growing up in other places playing soccer or rugby or whatever the other sports are and going, I can go to the Olympics playing flag football. That's really cool what he did. Maybe I'm getting into the American game. That's the chest of this entire thing. I mean, I think it'd be extremely fun. You watch everything. If you're, Clark Hunt, you're watching with gritted teeth, just going like, please don't have something weird happen with Mahomes. Or more likely one of the receivers or somebody else. You could have a collision. You could have God knows what happens. And it's happening during training camp. Even if you get a high ankle sprain, you're missing a bunch of time in the regular season. But for the good of the sport in the big picture and for my personal entertainment value, hell yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Get the NFL players out there.